Today I'm going to put my neck through some unnecessary pain for another battle of the flagships. On the left we have the all-new Insta360 Ace Pro 2, a camera that promises to deliver low-light excellence and superior audio quality. And on the right we have the all-new GoPro Hero 13 Black, which promises to fuel your creativity and provide Emmy-winning stabilization. Rather than just comparing marketing numbers on a website, I'm going to show you exactly how these two cameras perform in a variety of real-world mountain biking situations. When it comes to edge cases that are important to mountain biking content, it turns out that these two cameras aren't even close. Let's get into it. Now, as always, some disclosure. This video is brought to you by Insta360. They're an official sponsor of this YouTube channel, and they sent me this Ace Pro 2 bundle in a factory-sealed box to use in my content creation process. All opinions in this video are my own, and I would never have agreed to a partnership together if I didn't believe they made a quality product as you're going to see today. I've also avoided watching or reading anyone else's comparison content in order to further reduce potential bias. So thanks again to Insta360 for supporting my channel and making this highly requested video possible. Now, both of these new flagship cameras promise impressive performance at reasonable prices. Today we're going to look past the marketing claims and laboratory specs of both brands and take a look at how these cameras perform on trail in real-world mountain biking tests. It's easy enough to find tech details about either camera online, and if you're looking to learn more about the Ace Pro 2 specifically, I released a detailed video about that camera last week. When it comes to comparing two products like this, the numbers almost never tell the full story of performance for a given use case, so we're going to jump right into the money. The Insta360 Ace Pro 2 standard bundle comes in at $399 US, 549 Canadian, or 449 euros. This bundle comes with the camera, one battery, and their magnetic mount. If you'd like to add a flexible adhesive mount, you can pick up two for an additional $20 US. GoPro is priced their Hero 13 Black at $399 US dollars, 549 Canadian, or 449 euros. This includes the camera, one battery, one non-magnetic sticky mount, and a 1-year GoPro Premium subscription. If you want to add their magnetic mount, that will set you back an additional $20 US as a subscriber, or $25 as a non-subscriber. This makes the two cameras more or less the same price once you have equivalent bundles. Currently the GoPro is on sale, but since a sale is not a permanent price reduction, it only seems fair to quote the MSRP, as both companies will likely offer sales over the course of the year. This means we can focus on the performance of these cameras today rather than their price. In order to keep my testing as fair as possible, I kept my settings as consistent as possible between the two cameras. I also made sure that they were both updated with their latest firmware and performed a factory reset prior to adjusting only the following settings. I used the widest field of view available, action view on the Insta360, and hyper view on the GoPro. I used the lowest level of active stabilization, which is standard on the Insta360 and hyper smooth on the GoPro. I set the sharpness to low on the Insta360 and sharpness denoise to low on the GoPro. I use the iLog color profile on the Insta360 and the log color profile on the GoPro. It's worth noting that neither brand recommends this setting specifically in low light or nighttime environments, but I did not observe a noticeable difference once corrected for in post, and reducing setup error by always maintaining identical settings outweighs this potential con in my mind. I used the wind reduction audio setting on the Insta360 and the audio tuning to standard and wind reduction to auto on the GoPro. I selected the highest resolution that both manufacturers recommend for action sports, which is 4K for Insta360 and 5.3K for GoPro, though both were edited and exported in a single 4K DaVinci Resolve timeline before being uploaded to YouTube. I used the updated Ace Pro 2 iLog to Rec 709V 1.0 LUT and the GP Log Creative EV0 LUT provided by each company, with no further tweaks in order to grade the footage with the least bias possible. I chose 30 frames per second, a 16:9 aspect ratio, and the high bitrate option available for both cameras. I set the Insta360 to matrix metering mode since the default face priority setting has minimal relevance to mountain biking content. For all other settings, including white balance and exposure compensation, I let the cameras decide and I left them at their factory presets. I also installed my dual action camera mount to standardize the filming conditions and keep things as absolutely fair as possible. Now, as you've already seen, I will be switching between the footage from both cameras throughout this video and allowing you to decide which one you prefer more. Both of these two cameras are able to film great videos in nice, even, and ideal lighting conditions, but there are a few key differences that are worth noting, and the story quickly changes once things get dark, which mountain biking has quite a lot of. First, let's talk about the field of view. The Ace Pro 2 has a slightly wider horizontal field of view, and the GoPro Hero 13 has a slightly wider vertical field of view. Both cameras are wide enough to capture action sports accurately, but when we take a freeze frame, we can see that the GoPro has significantly more distortion than the Ace Pro 2 does. This frame was chosen specifically for its slow riding speed, so that shutter speed plays less of a role in the amount of detail captured. Now, trees usually grow in a straight line, and although Insta360 does not correct this perfectly with their action field of view, it is significantly closer than GoPro has managed. The heavier distortion is also very noticeable on my handlebars throughout this video, where they appear to have little to no back sweep on the GoPro footage, and honestly maybe a little bit of upsweep. Less distortion is always a good thing, especially when both cameras have roughly equivalent fields of view after the footage has been adequately stabilized. We can see that the Ace Pro 2 also managed to capture quite a bit more detail than the GoPro in this scene as well, despite only shooting at 4K rather than 5.3K. When we zoom into the center of the frame and manually correct for differences in exposure, both cameras produce sharp enough images for any action camera, with only minor differences in edge contrast to be seen. When we move to the top edge of the frame, the Ace Pro 2 starts to pull away and manages to capture slightly more texture of the bark and needles in the far trees. This is present on all four sides of the frame. And when we move to the extreme corner, the difference becomes also extreme. The Ace Pro 2 manages to capture a similar level of detail to that of the top edge of the frame, providing overall very solid image sharpness across the entire frame. This is very, very impressive for an action camera on a mountain bike ride. The GoPro's corners are blurry by comparison, lacking in detail, and the high contrast edges of trees aren't even sharp. All of these comments hold true when we move to the other extreme corner, with the Ace Pro 2 blowing the GoPro out of the water in terms of overall image quality and the amount of detail it captured. This image was also cherry-picked, as it was the sharpest frame the GoPro managed to produce of any of the frames around it. Part of this is likely due to GoPro's preference to select a lower ISO at the expense of a slower shutter speed, but overall image sharpness was a trend that continued even into well-lit environments. Next, let's talk about colors. Both cameras offer a standard color profile that requires no additional color correction in post, but I prefer to use a log-style color profile for its theoretical flexibility that it can provide you in post. Now, I'm no expert here, but if you're into photography, the analogy that I've heard is that it's similar to shooting RAW versus JPEG. Using the most recent official LUT provided by both brands, I find myself preferring the Ace Pro 2's colors, as the GoPro appears to have a slight magenta tint to its footage. And yes, my Onyx hubs really are that bright neon pink. Neither camera here is bad per se, but I do feel that the Ace Pro 2 does a better job at producing accurate colors without any manual post-processing. If I allowed myself to color correct this video, I would choose to bump up the saturation in post for both cameras, and I would manually white balance the GoPro using the white portion of the IMBI sticker on my handlebar, and I'd also increase the brightness of the GoPro clip in the lower light conditions. For stabilization, both cameras do a good enough job that my mom is able to watch these videos without getting motion sickness, but again, I find myself preferring the Ace Pro 2 here. The Ace Pro 2 provided more stable footage in an approximately equal field of view compared to the GoPro. This is especially true when coming into tight corners, where the Insta360 was able to smooth out the movement of a corner into a single continuous motion, whereas the GoPro would more readily accelerate into different directions and look a bit twitchy in my mind as a result. This effect could be observed even in ideal bright conditions. When the lighting was really dim or around sunset, the Ace Pro 2 managed to maintain excellent stability, whereas the GoPro's stabilization notably degraded as the forest got darker. But we're going to talk about low light performance in a minute. In my opinion, Insta360 has some of the best stabilization in the action camera industry for many years, and it's arguably more of a software company than a hardware company with its primary lineup of 360 cameras. So that lines up nicely. Now let's talk about an even more noticeable difference between the two cameras, and that would be their audio quality. As always, proof speaks louder than words, so take a listen to the audio quality of both of these cameras on the trail and let me know what you think.
Okay, this is an audio test of the Insta360 Ace Pro 2. And this is an audio test of the GoPro Hero 13 Black. Ace Pro 2, Hero 13 Black.
The Ace Pro 2's audio is not perfect. No action cameras is, but it's in a completely different league than the GoPro's muddy, muffled audio. Part of this is likely due to the hardware level wind cover present on the Ace Pro 2, which should cut out a decent amount of on-trail wind noise before being digitally reduced in camera. If you want the best of the best when it comes to audio quality, an external mic will always be the way to go, but the Ace Pro 2 does a more than adequate job in its stock configuration without having to resort to a foam wind cover or additional solution. The GoPro's audio quality is shockingly disappointing, and I would honestly consider adding an external option to give my audience the quality that they deserve. Speaking of shocking differences, it's time to talk about the low light performance of these two flagship cameras. Several of the clips that you're about to see were filmed within half an hour of sunset, facing east in a dark Vancouver forest. The most obvious difference is the brightness between the two images. The GoPro is nearly pitch black at points, and the Ace Pro 2 is relatively normally exposed despite the dark scene. Now, GoPro mentions that its Hero 13 Black has its ISO limited to 400 when using log encoding, and mentions that usage in darker settings is not recommended. I tested out both log and standard color profiles in these low light environments, and I found little difference in overall video quality between a log clip that had been brightened in post and a standard non-log clip. Insta360 also doesn't recommend using a log profile in dark environments, but after testing, I deem it a worthy trade-off for having identical settings and one-button operation regardless of the lighting environment. When the GoPro image is increased to a similar brightness as the Ace Pro 2, it is a considerable amount noisier. The Ace Pro 2 has impressively little noise for such an extreme test, especially color noise, and the stabilization remains strong independent of the lighting. Take a look at the top edge of this frame and watch how much the highlights from the background sky bounce around relative to the edge of the frame. There's actually a pretty big difference here between these two cameras. Low light performance isn't relevant to all video niches, but it's one of the primary factors that I consider when choosing an action camera as a mountain biker, and the Ace Pro 2 delivers on its marketing promises here. Moving on to the user experience side of things, the battery life of these two cameras is practically identical when filming at the aforementioned settings. I measured 110 minutes of recording time for the Ace Pro 2, and GoPro claims its Hero 13 Black can record up to 108 minutes at 4K and 30 FPS. Both provide a sufficient battery life for all but the biggest single-day or multi-day adventures, and with measured differences of less than 2% here, I'm unwilling to crown either the winner in this category, and it won't be a deciding factor. One of the first things that the average consumer will probably notice here is that the Insta360 has a rotating touchscreen, and the GoPro has two color displays. The flippy screen on the Ace Pro 2 is not overly useful for POV-style action sports, but it's built solidly enough that its durability is not a concern of mine. Where it does come in handy is when you're filming content off of the bike. For example, I filmed this time-lapse of the Northern Lights a few weeks back, and the articulating screen was fantastic here, as I had to keep the camera angled toward the sky on a very low tripod for wind stability. Without this flippy screen, I wouldn't have been able to see what I was doing, and I likely would have messed up the framing for such a special event. The rotating screen is also useful for handheld vlog-style content, although that isn't exactly an area of expertise for me. The additional functionality is worth the slight size and weight penalty if you end up filming anything off of your helmet. On the note of screens, both cameras have a very similar user interface, although GoPro has a slight edge in video setting adjusting efficiency since everything is all in one place. This makes the initial setup process slightly more efficient, but makes no difference whatsoever once you've dialed in your settings, and operate either camera with the push of a single button. The final detail I thought was worth mentioning between these two cameras is the difference in operation sounds. For the GoPro, you have the same Morse code style beeps that have stood the test of time for roughly a decade. In order to understand what the camera is doing, you have to count the number of beeps and remember what that number corresponds to. The Ace Pro 2 improves upon this antiquated system in two ways. The first is that it has unique, distinct sounds for all four common operations, being turning off and on, and starting and stopping recording. This is a big usability improvement already, but Insta360 also has another trick up their sleeve in the form of a vibration motor. Starting a recording produces a short vibration pulse, and ending a recording produces a long vibration pulse, both of which are extremely clear to hear when mounted to your full-face helmet, and make filming videos a little bit less intrusive on group rides with friends. I don't understand how Insta360 was able to add such a strong haptic feedback system to a camera with multiple carefully aligned lens elements, but I'm glad they did, as it provides a quality of life improvement over the antiquated beeps. If you're focused on creating the highest quality content possible, then the decision between these two cameras is an easy one in my mind. Both cameras have a very similar user experience, but the Ace Pro 2 beats the GoPro in almost every metric for video and audio quality. It records consistently sharper, more detailed footage even when filming at a lower resolution, manages to maintain the same field of view with notably less distortion, and runs laps around the GoPro when it comes to audio quality and low light performance. The GoPro is smaller, lighter, and has nicer feeling tactile buttons, but after running two cameras on my helmet at once, I am never going to complain about the weight of a single camera again. Given that these two cameras have the same MSRP in most, if not all, markets, it's an easy recommendation for the Ace Pro 2 from me, and I wouldn't have brought on Insta360 as a channel sponsor if I didn't believe so beforehand.